has actually settled the age-old debate of whether men or women fart worse, and neither side is going to like this answer. Researchers asked 16 men and women to come in and eat pinto beans and an artificial sweetener. You know, artificial sweeteners make you gassy, right? Then, these people came into a laboratory where a rectal tube was inserted and made a gas-tight seal with their behinds, which was then connected to a gas-impermeable bag, which collected the farts. And then, 2 judges came in, sat there, sniffed the bags, and rated the odor on a scale of 0 to 8. Here's what the experiment actually showed. First, the flatus of women was found to have a higher concentration of hydrogen sulfide, the nasty smelling part of our gas, compared to men. And so, women's gas was judged to have a greater odor intensity. The issue is that men tended to produce a larger volume of gas per toot. And so the actual amount of sulfur kind of equaled out.
I mean, this is the sort of news that you can use, Tony P. This is what, give the people what they want to know, okay?
Oh my God.
I also want to know about those judges. I want to know about those judges, Tony P. Did they volunteer for this? Or were they recruited for this? Were they paid for this? I have a ton of questions.
I mean, you must, like, enjoy, like, torture if you want to actually go do that voluntarily.
Tony P, that
just money must have been pretty high.
One example of the kinds of videos Dr. Trisha Pasricha posts on her Instagram account. And if you don't already know her, Dr. Trisha is the Ask a Doctor columnist for the Washington Post. She's a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. She's the director of the Institute for Gut-Brain Research at Beth Israel. And she is the author of this new book, You've Been Pooping All Wrong, How to Make Your Bowel Movements a Joy. It is a national bestseller. And tonight, Dr. Trisha joins us live on the Live Zone.
You're a hero, Doctor.
To talk more about her book, Bathroom Habits, Bowel Movements, and much, much more. Thank you so much for spending time with us and being willing to entertain our childish minds.
And our adult minds.
It is my pleasure to be here.
So what inspired this passion for not just passing gas, but all things gut-related?
Well, I grew up the daughter of a gastroenterologist. So for me, like, talking about our bowels was like a very normal conversation to have growing up. It wasn't until I became a gastroenterologist myself that I realized other people don't always grow up that way. And I decided to write this book because, 40% of Americans say that their bowel habits disrupt their daily lives, and that's such a big number, and it's something that we just don't talk about enough. So I use a little bit of humor and talk about some of these like really bizarre, fascinating studies to kind of introduce people to the idea that this is just a normal part of our bodies, and we shouldn't be ashamed of that, and hopefully get some people the help that they need.
Now, 2-part question. Okay, so, So how, when you think about the process, when you eat something, for example, whether it be pinto beans or hot dogs like I like to eat, right? How does the digestive process work from when you eat something and it goes through and then you have to, have that feeling to go? How do we get to that process? What does your body do to generate that, and how does gas play a role in that?
Well, it's funny you specifically said pinto beans. Like, I think we all know that plays a big role in gas, but that's actually what they used in that study that you mentioned in the beginning. That is part of the flatulogenic diet. But to your point, I think what people don't appreciate is that we all think that the first step in digestion is you take that first bite of food. That's actually not the first step. The first step of digestion takes place in the brain. And what I study is the gut-brain connection. And if you think about it, just picture like a gooey cake or like your favorite cheesy like pasta. If you start to think about food, you actually start to produce these digestive juices already in your gut. And there's no other organ that works that way, right? Like, you can think about like fresh mountain air, but your lungs are going to transport oxygen kind of exactly the same way. It's what really makes the gut unique. So just thinking about food is what starts the digestive process. And then, of course, it goes from your mouth down that long tube that's called the esophagus, which is just behind the heart, into your stomach, into your small bowel, into the colon. And at some point along the way, that food is being broken down in the small bowel, interacting with the microbes in the colon, and gas is produced. And that, too, has to exit one direction or the other.
Ah, got it. So like, it's more of like, it kind of happens at the same time. The gas kind of happens, and then you let that go. Same thing with the feeling to go number 2.
Yeah, well, a lot of people who feel that they have more gas than the average bear, the problem is often, first of all, I tell people, you probably don't have more gas than anyone else. Like, it's normal to pass gas like 10 to 20 times a day. That's like a big number if you think about it. Yeah, and then once you know that, you normalize that, you're like, wait, I'm like actually pretty suboptimal in that department. But, you know, a lot of the time the issue just is constipation, and your microbes are sitting there fermenting whatever's around, producing more gas until you expel everything that's hanging out in there.
Got it.
So, doctor, because a lot of people don't talk about this, and there's not really, you know, like you said, a lot of people feel a certain level of embarrassment, whatever it is. People don't necessarily always know what is normal when it comes to number two. So what is, and does it depend on the person?
Yes. You know, I think for some reason going once a day, the number one, like really has people in this chokehold. And like, if you don't go once a day, you feel like something is off. Yeah. That's not actually the case. Like if you survey Americans, which is what, you know, they've done looking at these national databases, going anywhere from once every third day to up to 3 times a day is kind of within the range of normal. And to some people hearing that, it'll be like, wait, once every 3 days? That's like really extreme. And then some people hear 3 times a day and they're like, whoa, that's like a really problem. So for me, I worry a little bit less about the number and more just like make sure it's effortless, you're not straining, and then does it disrupt your social life? Does it disrupt your partner's social life? If it's not doing that, you know, I could probably live with a lot of different patterns and call it normal.
Now, you mentioned, of course, in the book, the title of your book, that we're pooping all wrong. Okay, there's a lot of debate about how that process should be. From your medical perspective, what is the proper technique and way to go number 2 so that you can have the most pleasant experience possible?
Well, it's a long answer, but I do think that probably one of the biggest things that we're making the mistake of doing is we're straining and we're sitting in the bathroom a lot longer than we could. Like, I think that this is one example, the way that we have designed our modern bathrooms and the toilets, it's too comfortable. We are getting in there, we're bringing our smartphones in there, which I advocate that we don't do, or at least we set like a 2 TikTok limit, but we're just like having a good time, you know, and like this should be an in and out situation. Like back in, you know, if you think back like 10,000 years ago, people were squatting, right? Like you would never today, if someone was like, you have to squat when you go, you would never like pull out Netflix on your phone and be like watching the pit while squatting. You couldn't do that. And I think we've lost something along the way by just like making this too comfy an experience.
So in addition to it being too comfortable for some people, other people it is a very anxiety-inducing situation. And that's usually more the case when you're away from home base, let's just say. So what is it about this book that not only can help people poop better, but also kind of remove some of the anxiety associated with it too?
Yeah, this is really common. Like people really struggle to go in public bathrooms, and people even really struggle to go on vacation. Like 1 in 3, 1 in 4 people can't do those things. And that's a big problem considering a lot of people, their mornings are rushed, they're getting out the door, they're getting to work, and then they drink coffee when they get to work. 1 out of 3 people are going to have to go after that. So it's a big issue. And a lot of what I talk about in the book, there's a whole chapter about going in public. One, like in an ideal world, we'd redesign the bathrooms to these like lovely single stall situations, which don't always exist, but there are some things you can do to relax. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, to have a bowel movement, you have to feel relaxed. You can't always be hyper vigilant about like who's walking past you, who's in the stall next door. If you focus on those things, you won't be able to go. So I give a lot of techniques about how you can get past that, get through this, and then stop spending that much time in there.
Now, there's been a debate about this 90-degree rule, that you have to have your feet and your body kind of at a 90-degree angle to facilitate a pleasant experience. Now, there's tools like the squatty potty, things of that nature. Are those tools helpful? And are there tools in your book that people can use in the bathroom to make it go better?
Yeah, you know, we are actually like more physiologically primed to go when we're not at the 90-degree angle. Like, so us sitting here on a chair, you know, like this is not the same position we should be sitting in when we're in the bathroom. And the reason is that the colon is a long tube, and there's another muscle that wraps around the colon like a sling to kind of choke it closed. It's like your body stepping on its own hose. Well, that's fine when we're sitting at our desk and trying to go about our business, but in the bathroom, you really want that tube open. If you lift your knees above your waist, like with a stool, a stack of books, like an old box, whatever you got, that's actually going to make it a lot easier to go. That's why squatting is easy to do. The other thing people can try doing is just leaning forward, like the thinker, you know, like Rodin's sculpture. That's been studied in different research studies as well, and that can help facilitate making things easier. Exactly. You guys got it.
I over my technique now.
I know, right? Okay, so obviously, in addition to just the uncomfortableness or the anxiety that comes along with this, if we're not pooping correctly, there are also some really serious, obviously, and we've heard a lot about. Actually, my question is, are things changing for people? We have heard a lot about colorectal cancer rates, especially among young people. We have heard about high-profile celebrities, whether it's Chadwick Boseman and whether it's James Van Der Beek. So has something changed in us inherently that is kind of leading to this? And can some of the methods that you describe in this book help with this?
Yeah, all good questions. So first, yes, something has changed. You know, we think that generationally, something fundamentally about our environment and largely our food has changed and is increasing our risk of colorectal cancer in these early younger people in their 30s and 40s. Wow. And a lot of that new data, you know, there have been some big studies even within the last year, point towards ultra-processed food. Like we get 60% of our diet from ultra-processed foods. That's certainly not an optimal way of eating if you want to have a good bowel movement, but it's also raising your risk of all kinds of other, we know about diabetes, we know about heart health. Well, now cancer seems to be a complication of that. And, you know, one thing that I really try to emphasize in my book is that talking about your bowel habits is like partly a question of like living your best life, making, you know, going to the bathroom not a big deal, but it's also because it can signal something far more serious. And this is one of those things. Something like rectal bleeding. So if you see blood in there, that's a big red flag. If you've lost weight, if you have abdominal pain, these are big red flags, but it's not always that obvious. It can be just a change in your pattern. It can be, you know, you develop looser stools over a couple of weeks. You can't explain why. So it can be really subtle. And if you're someone who's not in the pattern of looking at, you know, like what every day after you go, if you're not in the pattern of talking about it, you're scared to bring that to your doctor. I'm afraid that sometimes we're going to miss these cases or they're going to come to us too late.
What are some foods that people can institute in their diet to not only be healthy and prevent things like colorectal cancer, but also prevent instances of constipation? I mean, a lot of folks in my generation, you know, as guys, we've talked about this in the past. I won't name names. We've talked about, like, you know, constipation's an issue too. What are some of the ways that we can prevent that as well as those diseases?
Yes, absolutely. And conveniently, a lot of the things that prevent constipation have also been well studied to lower your risk of cancer. So I think overall, people want more fiber in their diet. 95% of Americans, we're not getting enough fiber every day. And a lot of that is linked to how much ultra-processed foods we're eating. And, you know, diet is really hard to change. Sometimes I say, well, just do the absolute easiest thing, which is just take a fiber supplement, like start there. Fiber is wonderful because, especially like a soluble fiber, that can kind of help with the constipation because it can break it up. But remember, we don't eat fiber for ourselves. We do not possess the enzymes to break down fiber. We eat fiber to feed our microbes. And the microbes that are living in our microbiome then produce these anti-inflammatory compounds that are thought to lower the risk of colorectal cancer. So one way I think about it is like every day I ask myself, have I fed my microbes today? And if all I've eaten is a cheeseburger and fries and maybe some like highly ultra-processed cereal, that answer is going to be no. So I make up for it at dinner. I say, let me eat some probiotic food. Probiotic foods are really good. Anything that gets fiber, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, let me put more whole foods into my diet. All of those things are going to be good for your bowels and good for cancer reduction.
What kind of questions do you get from your friends and family when you go out to like dinner and stuff like that? Is this a topic?
Dinner conversation would be fascinating.
I mean, you were shouted out on Saturday Night Live by Colin Jost.
That's right.
It's hard to bring a gastroenterologist to a dinner party. Like people really like pull you aside and they're like, thank goodness I've got you here. And then you get like this like 5-minute spiel of their like whole life's history of their bowel trouble. But it's funny, like I have found like the joy of writing this book and going on a book tour and talking to people is that people like the metaphorical floodgates like really open. Like when you make it safe to have a conversation about it, everyone wants to talk about it because we're all dealing with it. So sometimes I get like really weird questions in my DMs. I have gotten weird pictures in my DMs. Do not do that, please.
Oh,
but,
no.
For the
no.
for the most part, it's been very delightful.
Oh, come on.
Wow.
Oh,
All right, so my next question.
I am like flabbergasted.
I know. My next question, speaking of which, and this is coming from the perspective of a new dad. I have a 5-month-old at home. Are there things that you can kind of do early? Thank you. Are there things you can kind of do early? Obviously, potty training is a huge stressful part of parenthood that I haven't even broached yet. But, you know, we're my wife and I are constantly, I mean, she hasn't pooped in like 4 days, and we're like, is this normal? We called the doctor one time because it was like, they were like, oh yeah, if it hasn't been a week, you're totally fine. But are there things that you can kind of do early in life to set them up for success?
Yes, I first of all, yeah, congratulations. I have a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, so I'm constantly thinking about this. We are just exiting the trenches of potty training with my 3-year-old, and so I think about a couple of things. Like, one thing that I hope to convey to my kids, like, I want them to grow up in a poop positive family the way I grew up, and so that means, like, you know, they're going to enter this phase at some point around 3 or 4 years old where all they're going to want to talk about is this topic. And even as a gastroenterologist, I'm like, for goodness sake, like, we've heard these jokes, so like, you have to stop. But I don't say that out loud because I never want to stigmatize or make them feel like we should be ashamed about this. We only talk about this in certain parts of the house, not at the dinner table, not in front of company. I just want to make them feel comfortable with this language, and they will grow out of the, like, kind of potty humor of it eventually. And then, you know, second, I do think about their microbiomes very carefully at that age. You know, the research shows that our microbiomes are most malleable from age 0 to 5. So they're in that critical window. That's the time when you want to train those microbes, train their taste buds to be focused a little more on whole foods, fiber, and less ultra-processed foods. And of course, that's the age. I mean, I grew up eating lots of ultra-processed foods. That was just kind of like the time. I'm really trying to reverse some of that for my kids, at least in this stage. And then, you know, what they do afterwards is on them. But while I have some control, I'm going to try.
All right, I have 2 final questions. So first one kind of goes to what you were talking about. Why do mostly guys really enjoy or are obsessed with potty humor, not just as kids, but into their 50s and 60s? Okay, I know this from actual life experience. My dad and I still talk about it. So why is that a big thing for guys? Why do we think it's funny?
You know what I would counter with that is that I think we think it's funny too. I think women find this hilarious, but we've trained ourselves, like, I think it does. I think my friends think it do, but we've somehow, like, culturally trained ourselves to say this is improper, this isn't, you know, like, what women. But I think if we were just to, like, unshackle ourselves from those, like, that cultural stigma, I think we would all have a good, like, parts of this is just funny. The sounds are funny. There's just a lot that we could derive humor from. And then when we derive humor from it, then we can just talk about it and get past that and, like, really focus on how cool the science is. So I kind of wish everybody was like you.
I love that. I mean, I think it could be a thing that could unify everybody. I think that is brilliant.
Because everybody poops.
Yes. Now, speaking of those sounds, so for people maybe like myself that have flatulent moments a lot during the day, okay, and don't want it to smell so bad, let me ask you, what could my diet do to improve so that I wouldn't be hurting my co-host or the loved ones in my life with my presence?
Great question. Actually, this is a common question I get in clinic. And, you know, there's a couple of things. There are certain foods that we know can cause more, not just flatulence, but particularly, like, what we might consider a malodorant flatulence. And so, like, pinto beans are, like, a really good example, but anything like garlic, onions, these things can do it. What I actually, like, try to tell people, though, is that a lot of the things that cause flatulence are actually good for you. They're prebiotics. I don't actually really ever want to tell someone, don't eat beans, because, like, what a wonderful source of fiber and protein. Instead, I say, okay, if there is a moment, like, you know, like, maybe you're going on a date, maybe you're going on a work trip, maybe you're having the in-laws over for Thanksgiving and you're like, I really just, for like one weekend, I don't want to deal with this. Then I say, okay, like, maybe you could change your diet, or you could pop some Pepto-Bismol, which is just bismuth subsalicylate. That helps bind and neutralize the sulfur-containing gases, and it really does eliminate the problem, like, more than 90% of the time.
So Pepto-Bismol for something other than a stomach ache.
Yes, it does a lot of things.
Wow.
Pepto. All right, Tony P, and the P stands for Pepto.
I have a new idea.
My final question, if people want to get a copy of your book, if they want to follow you for more details and not just about their bowels. You do a ton of complex medical topics, and you make it fun, interesting, and
brilliant.
digestible, to pun intended. How can they do so?
Thank you. Well, you can follow me on Instagram, and the book is available anywhere books are sold.
All right. I love to see it. Dr. Trisha, thank you so much for
thank
spending
you.
some time with
This
us here
was
on the
for
Live Zone
humoring
Prime
me.
Time.